The porch light flickers on at 6:45 every evening, and Helen Cartwright steps into the humid Georgia twilight, white cane tapping a familiar rhythm against weathered wood. She's been doing this for 317 days. The neighbors along Magnolia Street have learned to time their suppers by her vigil. The blind woman in the yellow sundress, standing motionless at her gate, listening for footsteps that never come. Some pull their curtains. Others watch through the gap between lace panels, whispering theories they'll never speak aloud. Because in Valdosta, Georgia, in the summer of 1966, certain truths are considered too cruel to voice. Helen's world is sound and texture and the ghost of memory. The creak of the third porch step, the scrape of the mailbox lid, the particular jingle of keys her husband Michael wore on his belt loop, brass against steel, a melody she could pick out of a symphony. She knows the neighborhood by ear. Mrs. Patterson's screen door slams at 7:30. The Kowalski boys' bicycle bell chimes past at 8. And somewhere between those sounds, she waits for the one that matters. Before we go further, comment below and tell us where you're watching from and what time it is in your world right now. And if this story pulls at something in you, hit that like button and subscribe. Stories like Helen's deserve to be remembered. The heat clings to everything in South Georgia in July. Magnolia blossoms rot sweet on the sidewalk. Cicadas scream their mechanical prayers. Helen's cotton dress sticks to her shoulders, but she doesn't move. She learned stillness in the 16 months since the accident that took her sight. A kitchen fire, a moment of carelessness, a world reduced to darkness and waiting. Michael had promised he'd always come home, that she'd always hear him first. The little girl appears on Tuesday evening, when the sky bleeds orange through the oak trees. Helen hears the shuffle of small feet, the hiccup of breath that means a child is working up courage. "Miss Helen?" The voice is tiny, cautious. "My daddy says I shouldn't bother you." Helen tilts her head, a smile softening the tension in her jaw. "You're not bothering me, sweetheart. You're the Callahan girl, aren't you? From the big house next door?" "Yes, ma'am. I'm Lucy. I'm 7. 7's a fine age." Helen's fingers tighten on her cane. "What brings you over here, Lucy?" A pause. The child's shoes scuff against dirt. "I wanted to ask you something, but Daddy said it's not polite." Sometimes the impolite questions are the most important ones. Lucy's voice drops to a whisper, as if confessing a sin. "Why do you wait out here every night? Everybody says your husband's not coming back." The words land like stones in still water. Helen's smile doesn't waver, but something shifts behind her sightless eyes, a fracture too small to name. "That's what everybody says, is it?" "Yes, ma'am, my daddy said." Lucy stops, and Helen hears the adult voice calling from the neighboring property, sharp with alarm. "Lucy! Lucy Callahan! You get back here right now!" The girl runs, and Helen is alone again with the cicadas and the heat and the terrible weight of what a 7-year-old child just confirmed. Everyone knows. Everyone but her. The man who appears 10 minutes later moves differently than the child. Heavier footfalls, deliberate, the gait of someone used to being listened to. Helen recognizes wealth in the cadence of his walk, confidence, the kind of assurance that comes from never having to ask twice. "Mrs. Cartwright." His voice is deep, careful. "I'm James Callahan. I apologize for my daughter. She spoke the truth." Helen turns toward him, and for a moment, James Callahan feels the full force of her sightless gaze. "Didn't she?" He doesn't answer immediately. Helen hears him shift his weight, the creak of expensive leather shoes. When he finally speaks, His voice carries something she hasn't heard from anyone in months. Honesty. Yes, ma'am, she did. The silence that follows is a living thing. How long have you known? Helen asks. Since the beginning. I was there when the sheriff came to tell you Michael wasn't coming home from his deployment. But you... He pauses, and she hears the confusion in his hesitation. You didn't believe him. You asked him to check again. I didn't believe him because Michael promised. Helen's voice is steady, but her knuckles are white against the cane. He promised he'd come back, and Michael never broke a promise. Mrs. Cartwright, did they find his body? The question stops him cold. No, James admits. They didn't. And there it is, the twist that changes everything. Because Helen Cartwright isn't delusional or broken or lost in grief. She's been waiting not because she refuses to accept the truth, but because somewhere deep in her bones, she knows something everyone else has written off as impossible. Michael Cartwright is still alive. And James Callahan, the millionaire widower who's been watching this quiet tragedy unfold from his columned mansion next door, is about to discover that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is help someone else keep faith in the impossible. But first, he'll have to understand what his daughter just set in motion, and why the woman who waits in the dark might be the sanest person on Magnolia Street. James Callahan's study smells of leather-bound books and bourbon, pipe tobacco lingering in the velvet curtains his late wife chose 3 years before the cancer took her. He stands at the window now, watching Helen Cartwright's silhouette against the porch light, and feels the familiar ache of recognizing his own grief in someone else's posture. The whiskey in his glass has gone warm. Outside, moths circle the light like prayers with wings. Lucy appears in his doorway, still in her nightgown, clutching the stuffed rabbit she's had since her mother died. Daddy? Is Miss Helen going to be okay? James turns from the window. His daughter's eyes, Caroline's eyes, that same storm cloud gray, search his face for reassurance he's not sure he can give. Come here, little bird. She climbs into his lap, and he breathes in the scent of her strawberry shampoo, the simple perfume of childhood innocence. I shouldn't have said those things to her, should I? You told her the truth. Sometimes that's the kindest thing we can do, even when it hurts. James smooths her hair, thinking about the past 10 months of watching Helen's vigil. But I should have been the one to say it long ago. The Callahan fortune came from timber and textile mills, 3 generations of wealth that built the finest house in Valdosta, 12 rooms, crystal chandeliers, a garden that employed 4 groundskeepers. But money, James had learned, couldn't buy back time or protect the people you loved from the universe's casual cruelties. It couldn't save Caroline from the lymphoma that hollowed her out in 18 months. And it couldn't explain why he'd been too much of a coward to cross 20 yards of lawn and speak honestly to a woman drowning in false hope. Until tonight. What if everybody's wrong? Lucy whispers against his chest. What if her husband really is coming back? James has spent his adult life dealing in certainties, timber yields, market projections, contractual obligations. But his daughter's question opens a door he's kept locked since he buried his wife. What if hope isn't delusion? What if faith is its own kind of sight? The next morning arrives heavy with heat and the smell of honeysuckle dying in the sun. James crosses the property line at 8:15, carrying a basket his housekeeper prepared. Fresh bread, preserves, sliced ham from the smokehouse. He's made this walk a dozen times in his head, rehearsed the words until they lost all meaning. Helen's front door is open, screen door latched. He knocks and hears movement inside. the tap of her cane, the careful navigation of someone who's memorized every obstacle in their home. Mr. Callahan. She appears behind the screen, her hair pinned up, wearing a house dress that's been carefully ironed despite the fact that she can't see wrinkles. You don't have to bring me charity. It's not charity, it's an apology. He holds up the basket she can't see, and maybe the start of a conversation we should have had months ago. She hesitates, then unlatches the screen. Come in then. But I won't lie to you. I'm not interested in being convinced of anything. Helen's home is modest, but immaculate. Everything has its place. James notices the precision immediately. The shoes lined perfectly by the door. The mail stacked in identical increments on the entry table. The photographs on the mantel arranged by size. It's the home of someone who's imposed order on chaos, who's built a map of the world through touch and memory. Coffee? She offers, already moving toward the kitchen with practiced efficiency. Please. He follows, watching her hands find the pot, the cups, the sugar bowl, each movement economical, certain. How long were you married before he deployed? 2 years, 3 months, and 16 days. Helen pours without spilling a drop. We met at a church social. I was teaching Sunday school. He was the volunteer who fixed the piano. A ghost of a smile. He had terrible pitch, but steady hands. James accepts the coffee, noting the wedding band she still wears, the way she touches it unconsciously when she mentions Michael's name. The sheriff said he was listed as missing in action near Pleiku, March 19th, 1965. That's what they said. Helen sits across from him, her posture perfect, her sightless eyes fixed somewhere past his left shoulder. But Michael wrote me a letter 2 weeks before that. Said he was being transferred to a classified assignment. Said he couldn't tell me where, but he'd be home by Christmas. Helen, I know what you're thinking. That grief makes us hear what we want to hear. That I'm clinging to false promises because the alternative is too painful. Her voice hardens. But I'm not crazy, Mr. Callahan, and I'm not stupid. I know what the Army told me. I also know my husband. James sets down his cup carefully. What did the Army tell you exactly? That Michael's unit was ambushed, that several men were killed, others taken prisoner. That Michael was among the missing, presumed dead after 90 days with no contact. She pauses, but they never found his body, never found his dog tags, never found any evidence except the word of one surviving soldier who said he saw Michael fall. Who was the soldier? A Lieutenant Morrison. He came to visit me 6 months ago. Sat right where you're sitting and told me how sorry he was. How brave Michael had been. How quick it had been. Helen's jaw tightens. But his story kept changing. First he said Michael was shot. Then he said it was shrapnel. Then he said he wasn't entirely sure because it was dark and chaotic. I may be blind, Mr. Callahan, but I can still hear when someone's lying. The revelation shifts something in James's chest. She isn't delusional. She's investigating. Did you tell the Army your suspicions? 3 times. They sent me polite letters thanking me for my concern and assuring me that Lieutenant Morrison's account had been thoroughly verified. Helen's smile is bitter. Apparently, the word of a blind widow doesn't carry much weight against military records. James leans forward, his businessman's mind already sorting possibilities, calculating angles. What do you need? I need someone who'll listen. Someone with resources I don't have. Someone who... She stops, as if surprised by her own request. Someone who believes me. Lucy's voice echoes from his memory. What if everybody's wrong? James Callahan has spent 3 years in careful mourning, maintaining his routine, raising his daughter, managing his empire, with competent detachment. He's forgotten what it feels like to fight for something uncertain, to risk comfort for the possibility of truth. But looking at Helen Cartwright's face, the fierce set of her mouth, the way her hands stay steady despite everything, he remembers. "I believe you," he says quietly. And with those 3 words, he commits himself to a mystery that will unravel far more than either of them can imagine. Because sometimes the truth isn't buried overseas in unmarked graves. Sometimes it's hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone brave enough or foolish enough to start asking the right questions. The Valdosta Public Library smells of dust and floor wax, and the particular mustiness of newspapers archived in bound volumes that no one reads anymore. James sits at a heavy oak table, surrounded by months of microfiche reels and casualty reports he's convinced the librarian to pull from restricted circulation. Lucy is at his elbow, supposedly doing homework, but actually sorting through photographs Helen provided. Snapshots of Michael in uniform, letters creased from repeated folding, a wedding portrait where both faces shine with uncomplicated joy. "Daddy, look at this one." Lucy holds up a photo dated October 1964. Miss Helen is wearing the same dress she wears now, the yellow one. James takes the photograph, studies it. Helen and Michael at a county fair, his arm around her shoulders, her smile radiant. The yellow sundress, cotton, simple, probably bought at Woolworth's, has become her uniform of faith. She's wearing the last thing he saw her in before he left. She's keeping herself visible for his return. "That's called devotion, little bird," James murmurs. The librarian, Mrs. Henderson, a formidable woman whose cat-eye glasses hang on a beaded chain, approaches with another stack of folders. "Mr. Callahan, I found the Army casualty notifications from March through June of '65. And I took the liberty of pulling news reports about that particular engagement near Pleiku." She pauses, lowering her voice. "My nephew served in that region. What they reported and what actually happened were often very different things." James nods his thanks, already scanning the documents. The official record is sparse. Sergeant Michael Joseph Cartwright, serial number US 51847-239, reported missing in action, March 19, 1965, during reconnaissance operation, presumed deceased after regulatory period. Nothing about the circumstances, nothing about witnesses, just bureaucratic language designed to close files and end questions. But tucked into the back of the casualty folder, James finds something that makes his pulse quicken. A handwritten notation, partially redacted, dated April 2, 1965. Further investigation requested by unit chaplain. Inconsistencies in survivor testimony. Request denied. Case closed per CO directive. Someone else had doubts. Someone official, and someone with more authority, had shut it down. "Mrs. Henderson," James says carefully, "is there any way to find out who the commanding officer was for that unit?" She disappears into the back room, returns 15 minutes later with a name written on library cardstock. Colonel Richard Morrison, 5th Special Forces Group. Morrison. The same last name as the lieutenant who visited Helen. James sits back, the pieces arranging themselves into a pattern he doesn't like. He thinks about Helen's description of Lieutenant Morrison's changing story, the way the Army dismissed her concerns, the sealed casualty report that should be routine but feels deliberately obscured. "Daddy?" Lucy's voice is small. "Are you thinking what I'm thinking?" "What are you thinking, sweetheart?" "That maybe somebody didn't want Miss Helen to find out the truth." She touches the wedding photo, her finger tracing Michael's smile. that maybe they lied on purpose. Out of the mouths of children. That evening, James drives to Helen's house with a briefcase full of documents and a theory he's not sure he should voice. The sun is setting, painting Magnolia Street in amber light, and Helen is already on her porch, waiting. She turns toward the sound of his car with the precision of someone who's learned to navigate the world through sound alone. "You found something," she says before he reaches the gate. Not a question. "How did you know?" "Your footsteps are different. Faster. The way you close the car door, more force than yesterday." She tilts her head. "And Lucy's with you. She only comes when there's news she thinks is important." Lucy runs ahead, takes Helen's hand. "Miss Helen, we think your husband might still be alive. Really alive. Not just hoping alive." Helen's face transforms, not quite a smile but something close to vindication. "Tell me everything." Inside, James spreads documents across Helen's kitchen table, describing what he found, while Helen listens with an intensity that makes him weigh every word. When he mentions Colonel Morrison's name, her hand freezes on her coffee cup. "Morrison," she repeats. "The lieutenant who visited me said his father was his commanding officer. Said his father spoke highly of Michael before..." She stops. "Before the ambush." "What if it wasn't an ambush?" James says quietly. "What if something else happened, and the Morrison family has been covering it up?" Helen is silent for a long moment. When she speaks, her voice is steady but strained. "Michael's last letter. The one about the classified assignment. I never showed it to the army." "Why not?" "Because he told me not to. He said if anything happened, I should keep it safe but keep it private. That there were things happening that weren't what they seemed." Helen stands, moves with certainty to a bookshelf, reaches behind a row of cookbooks, and retrieves an envelope. "I've read this letter so many times I have it memorized, but I want you to read it yourself." James opens the envelope carefully. The letter is dated March 4th, 1965, 15 days before Michael was reported missing. "My dearest Helen, I can't tell you where I'm going or what I've been asked to do, but I need you to know that I'm doing it because it's right, even though it's dangerous. I've learned things about our operation here that don't sit well with my conscience. There are men profiting from this war in ways that would sicken you. Officers diverting supplies, selling weapons, lining their pockets while soldiers die. I've been documenting everything, and I've been asked to deliver this evidence to investigators stateside. If something happens to me before I can complete this mission, know that I didn't die in combat. If someone tells you I was killed by the enemy, don't believe them. The enemy we're fighting isn't always wearing black pajamas. I'll be home by Christmas, I promise. Keep the porch light on for me. All my love, Michael." The letter drops from James's hands like lead. This isn't a missing soldier story. This is a whistleblower who got disappeared. Lucy looks between the adults, her young mind processing the implications. Someone made him disappear because he knew bad things, and then they lied to Miss Helen so she wouldn't ask questions. Helen's face has gone pale, her sightless eyes bright with unshed tears. He tried to do the right thing, and they erased him for it. "Not erased," James says, his voice harder than he intends. "Hidden. There's a difference. If they'd wanted him dead, they would have produced a body. The fact that they haven't means he might actually be alive." Helen breathes the words like a prayer. "Oh God. James, what if he's been alive this whole time, and I've just been standing on my porch while he's..." Her voice breaks. James reaches across the table, covers her hand with his. The gesture is instinctive, intimate in a way that surprises them both. Then we find him. We find out what happened and we bring him home. How? The army won't help. The Morrisons have covered this up for over a year. We have no proof beyond a letter that could be dismissed as the paranoid ramblings of a stressed soldier. We have something better than proof. James stands, begins gathering the documents. We have a pattern, and we have resources they don't know we have. I'm not just a timber baron, Helen. I have friends in Atlanta, friends in Washington, friends who owe me favors and who know how to ask uncomfortable questions in places where people would rather keep secrets buried. Helen stands as well, squaring her shoulders, and in that moment James sees not the helpless blind widow the neighborhood pities, but the fierce woman who's been fighting alone for 10 months with nothing but faith and stubborn hope. When do we start? She asks. Tomorrow. But tonight. James glances at Lucy, who's watching them with wise, too old eyes. Tonight we let ourselves believe that hope isn't foolish, that faith can move mountains, that a woman who waits is sometimes the bravest person in the room. Helen smiles, and it reaches her sightless eyes. I knew he was coming back. I knew it. But what none of them know yet is that Michael Cartwright's story is darker and more complicated than they can imagine, and that finding him will require them to confront not just military corruption, but the lengths desperate men will go to protect their secrets. And somewhere, in a place none of them would think to look, Michael Cartwright is also waiting, counting days, hoping someone remembers him, praying the light is still on. The Atlanta Federal Building rises like a gray monolith against the September sky, its brutalist architecture designed to intimidate anyone who comes seeking answers from the government. James Callahan walks through the marble lobby with Helen on his arm and Lucy trailing behind, clutching her rabbit. They make an unlikely trio, the millionaire in his tailored suit, the blind woman in her yellow dress, the child who insisted she wouldn't be left behind. Eyes follow them to the elevator, whispers trailing in their wake. James has called in every favor he accumulated over 3 decades of business. Phone calls to senators he funded, letters to army officials he served alongside in Korea, quiet meetings with journalists who owe him for tips that built careers. It took 6 weeks to arrange this appointment, and even now, he's not certain what they'll find. The office belongs to Captain Frank Sullivan, Army Criminal Investigation Division, a compact man with steel-gray hair and eyes that have seen enough lies to recognize truth when it walks through his door. Mr. Callahan. Sullivan stands, offers his hand, then notices Helen and softens. Mrs. Cartwright, please sit. Helen settles into the chair with Lucy beside her, her hands folded in her lap with practiced composure. Captain Sullivan, thank you for seeing us. I'll be honest with you, ma'am. When Mr. Callahan requested this meeting, I pulled your husband's file. Sullivan opens a folder on his desk. What I found troubled me enough to take this meeting off the books. James leans forward. Meaning? Meaning Sergeant Cartwright's disappearance was flagged for investigation 3 separate times. Once by his unit chaplain, once by a journalist embedded with his company, and once by an intelligence officer who thought the official story had holes you could drive a truck through. All 3 investigations were shut down within 48 hours by the same person. Colonel Richard Morrison, Helen says quietly. Sullivan's eyebrows rise. You've done your homework. We've had to. James slides Michael's letter across the desk. Because we believe Sergeant Cartwright wasn't killed in action. We believe he was disappeared because he discovered evidence of corruption involving Colonel Morrison and possibly others. Sullivan reads the letter twice, his jaw tightening with each pass. When he finally looks up, his expression is carefully neutral. This is extremely serious. If what you're suggesting is true, if it's true, my husband has been missing for 17 months while the army calls him dead. Helen's voice doesn't waver. If it's true, good men have been protecting criminals while an innocent soldier rots somewhere, abandoned. If it's true, Captain, then somebody needs to have the courage to do something about it. The silence that follows is heavy with calculation. Lucy speaks into it, her small voice somehow carrying weight. My daddy says that doing the right thing isn't always safe, but that doesn't make it less right. Sullivan looks at the child, and something in his face cracks, the professional mask slipping to reveal the human underneath. Your daddy's a wise man. He turns back to Helen. Mrs. Cartwright, I'm going to tell you something that could cost me my career. Last year, there was a classified investigation into supply chain irregularities in Southeast Asia. Weapons going missing. Medical supplies ending up on black markets. Money disappearing into ghost accounts. 3 officers were implicated, but the investigation was buried before anyone could be court-martialed. Let me guess, James says. Colonel Morrison was one of them. He was the primary target, but he had powerful friends in the Pentagon, and the evidence mysteriously became inadmissible. The investigation was sealed. The officers involved were quietly transferred or retired with full honors, and the whole thing got swept under the rug in the name of morale and operational security. Sullivan closes the folder. Your husband was working as a supply sergeant. If he was documenting evidence of theft, he would have seen everything. Helen finishes. Every discrepancy, every falsified report. And if Morrison discovered that Sergeant Cartwright was planning to expose him, James doesn't finish the sentence. He doesn't have to. Sullivan stands, moves to the window, his back to them. When he speaks, his voice is low. There's a facility, off the books, deep in the North Carolina mountains. It's where the Army sends soldiers who become inconvenient. Whistleblowers, dissidents, men who know too much and can't be trusted to stay quiet. Officially, it doesn't exist. Unofficially, it's a prison disguised as a psychiatric hospital. Helen's breath catches. Is Michael there? I don't know. I don't have access to those records, but Sullivan turns back to face them. If you were going to make someone disappear without killing them, if you needed them alive in case they'd already shared evidence with someone else, that's where you'd put them. The room spins around Helen. 17 months. 17 months of standing on her porch while Michael was locked away, waiting for rescue, believing she'd forgotten him or stopped caring or accepted the lie that he was dead. How do we get him out? James's voice is steel. You don't. Not legally. That facility is military, jurisdiction, maximum security, and even if I believed you, which I do, I can't authorize an intervention based on speculation and a year-old letter. Then what can you do? Helen asks, and there's an edge to her voice that makes even Sullivan flinch. He reaches into his desk drawer, pulls out a photograph, slides it across the surface. This was taken 3 weeks ago by a supply driver who makes runs to that facility. He's a friend. He knows I'm interested in certain irregularities. He took this because he recognized the man in it from casualty photos I'd shown him. James picks up the photograph. It shows a chain-link fence, a concrete building beyond, and in the foreground, distant but unmistakable, a man in prison grays, his face gaunt, his hair longer than military regulation, but his posture recognizable. Helen can't see the photograph, but she hears James's sharp intake of breath, feels Lucy's small hand squeeze hers. "Is it him?" Helen whispers. James studies the image, comparing it to the wedding photo Lucy still carries. Same jaw, same way of standing with weight on his left leg. Same scar above his right eyebrow from a childhood fall Michael had told Helen about during their courtship. "It's him," James says, and his voice breaks on the words. "Helen, he's alive." She doesn't cry. She doesn't collapse. She sits perfectly still, processing 17 months of vindication and rage and grief and hope all colliding in her chest at once. "Where is this facility?" she asks. "Mrs. Cartwright, where is it?" Sullivan looks at James, who nods slowly. The captain sighs, pulls out a map, marks a location in the Appalachian foothills. "But I'm telling you, there's no legal way to extract him. Morrison has friends too high up. You'd need evidence so damning that they can't ignore it. Proof so ironclad that... Then we get that evidence." Helen stands, her cane finding the floor with a decisive tap. "Captain Sullivan, you've given us the truth. Now we're going to use it." James rises beside her, his mind already calculating logistics, risks, possibilities. How long would it take to organize a congressional investigation if we had that level of proof? Weeks, maybe months. But Mrs. Cartwright, your husband has been in there for over a year. If Morrison realizes someone's asking questions, then we don't give him time to realize. Helen turns toward where she knows the door is, her posture rigid with determination. "We go get Michael ourselves. Tonight." "Helen," James begins, but she cuts him off. "He's been waiting for 17 months, James, believing I was coming, hoping someone remembered, every single day in that place, thinking he'd been abandoned." Her voice cracks, then steadies. "I won't make him wait one more night." Sullivan looks at this blind woman, this millionaire, this 7-year-old child, and sees something he thought the army had beaten out of him years ago. Righteousness. The kind that doesn't calculate odds or count costs. "You'll need help," he says quietly. "And I know people who are tired of watching good men suffer for telling the truth." Outside the federal building, the autumn sun breaks through clouds, gilding Magnolia Street and every other street in every other town where people wait for soldiers who might never come home. But Helen Cartwright isn't waiting anymore. She's coming, and God help anyone who tries to stop her. The North Carolina mountains rise black against a starless sky, pine trees pressing close to the narrow road like witnesses holding their breath. James drives with his headlights off, navigating by memory of the route they scouted yesterday. Helen beside him with her hands clasped tight enough that her knuckles show white even in darkness. Lucy sleeps in the back seat, exhausted from 2 days of hurried preparation, her rabbit tucked under her chin. Behind them, 3 vehicles follow at careful intervals. Captain Sullivan in his personal truck, 2 former MPs he vouched for, and a journalist named Patricia Morse, who's been investigating military corruption for the Washington Post and jumped at the chance to break a story this explosive. 2 miles, James murmurs, checking the odometer against his notes. Helen nods, her face set in an expression James has learned to recognize, the look of someone who's made peace with whatever comes next. She's been calm since Atlanta, preternaturally so, as if 17 months of waiting have distilled into this single crystallized moment of action. The facility appears exactly as Sullivan described, a collection of low concrete buildings surrounded by chain link and razor wire, floodlights casting harsh pools of illumination across barren ground. It looks like every military installation James saw during his service, anonymous and coldly efficient. A sign near the gate reads, Appalachian Regional Medical Center, the kind of deliberately vague name that tells you everything by telling you nothing. They park a quarter-mile away, where the forest provides cover. Sullivan approaches James's truck, his face grim in the dome light. "Last chance to reconsider," he says quietly. "Once we cross that fence, we're all committing federal crimes, breaking and entering a military facility, interfering with lawful custody, possibly treason if Morrison's friends spin it right. And if we don't?" Helen's voice cuts through the darkness. "How many more men like Michael are in there, Captain? How many more families are told their soldiers are dead while they rot in a prison that doesn't exist?" Sullivan doesn't answer because there is no answer. He just nods, checks his watch. Guard change is at 0200. That gives us 17 minutes. Patricia Morse emerges from her vehicle with a camera bag slung over her shoulder. She's a slight woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and the weathered look of someone who's spent years chasing truth into dangerous places. "Mr. Callahan, Mrs. Cartwright, whatever we find in there, I'm documenting everything. This story is going to print regardless of what happens to us afterward. Make sure Lucy's face isn't in any photographs," James says. "Whatever else happens, she shouldn't pay for our choices." They move through the forest like ghosts, Sullivan leading with the practiced stealth of someone who's done this before in places far more dangerous. One of the MPs, a Korean War veteran named Deacon who lost his own brother to military corruption, carries bolt cutters for the fence. The other, Torres, has a medical kit strapped to his back. The fence goes down with a series of soft metallic snaps that sound deafening in the mountain silence. They slip through one by one, Helen moving with James's hand on her elbow, her cane left in the truck because it would make noise on the concrete. Inside, the facility is a maze of identical corridors lit by fluorescent tubes that hum with mechanical persistence. Sullivan consults a floor plan he obtained through channels he refuses to name, pointing them toward the eastern wing where long-term patients are housed. They pass doors with small windows, each revealing the same scene. Narrow beds, institutional walls, men who look like soldiers but move like prisoners. Some sleep, others stare at ceilings. One rocks back and forth, lips moving in silent conversation with invisible companions. Helen hears it all. The shuffle of feet, the creak of bed springs, the low moan of someone lost in nightmares. Her hand tightens on James's arm. "How many?" 23 occupied rooms in this wing," Sullivan whispers. "God knows how many more in the other buildings." They're halfway down the corridor when a voice stops them cold. "Checking on the merchandise?" A man steps from an office doorway, mid-50s, military haircut gone silver, colonel's insignia on his civilian jacket. His face is familiar from newspaper photographs James found during his research. Colonel Richard Morrison himself. "Gentleman, lady." Morrison's smile is cold, amused. "I have to admire the dedication. Breaking into a secure facility on the word of a blind widow and a half-senile supply driver's photograph. That takes a special kind of stupid." Sullivan's hand moves toward his concealed weapon, but Morrison raises a finger. "I wouldn't. My security team has all of you in their sights right now. One signal from me, and you're all arrested for domestic terrorism, or shot while attempting to escape. I haven't decided which story I prefer yet." Helen steps forward, and something in her movement makes Morrison's smile falter. She can't see him, but she faces him with the uncanny accuracy of someone who's learned to navigate by sound and presence. "Where is my husband?" "Your husband is dead, Mrs. Cartwright. Has been for 17 months. You have my condolences. You're a liar and a thief and a coward." Helen's voice is quiet, precise, each word landing like a blade. Michael documented your crimes. He was going to expose you. So you had him disappeared, told his wife he was dead, and locked him in here like an animal. Do you sleep at night, Colonel? Do you think about the families you've destroyed for money? Morrison's facade cracks, anger bleeding through the professional veneer. You self-righteous civilians. You have no idea what it takes to run a war. The shortcuts necessary. The compromises required. Your precious Michael was going to undermine an entire operation over some missing supplies and creative accounting. He would have gotten good men killed with his Boy Scout morality. So you got him killed instead, James says. I got him contained. There's a difference. Morrison gestures down the hallway. Every man in this facility is here because he couldn't understand that some truths are too dangerous to speak. They're fed, they're housed, they're alive. That's more mercy than enemy combatants get. Patricia Morse has been photographing everything, her camera clicking softly in the fluorescent glare. Morrison notices, lunges for her, but Deacon intercepts him. Two old soldiers colliding with the practiced violence of men who've fought before. In the chaos, Sullivan makes his move. He runs down the corridor, checking windows, calling Michael's name. Torres follows, then James, then Helen, moving by sound and desperate hope down a hallway that might hold her husband, or might hold nothing but more broken men. Michael! Helen's voice echoes off concrete. Michael, can you hear me? 3 doors from the end, a face appears at a window. Gaunt, bearded, hollow-eyed from months of captivity, but alive. Unmistakably, impossibly alive. Helen? The voice is rough, uncertain, as if he's afraid he's hallucinating again. Helen, is that really you? She crashes against the door, her hands flat against steel, tears streaming down her face. I'm here. I'm here, baby. I never stopped waiting. I kept the light on. Every single night I kept the light on. Inside the cell, Michael Cartwright slides down the wall, his body shaking with sobs he's held back for 17 months. I knew you would come. I knew you'd figure it out. I knew. Torres works on the lock while behind them, Morrison is screaming for guards. Deacon is holding him down. Patricia is documenting everything, and Sullivan is calling in backup through encrypted channels to allies he's been cultivating for exactly this moment. The lock gives. The door swings open, and Helen Cartwright, blind, fierce, faithful Helen, walks into that cell and finds her husband's face with her hands, tracing the changes that captivity has carved into his features. You're so thin, she whispers. You're wearing the yellow dress. His voice breaks. You're still wearing the yellow dress. I told you I'd be waiting when you came home. They hold each other in a prison cell, in a facility that doesn't exist while around them. The walls of military corruption begin to crumble. Because Patricia Morse is already transmitting photographs to her editors. Because Sullivan's allies are descending on the facility with federal warrants and congressional oversight. Because sometimes, when you tell the truth loudly enough and refuse to stop believing, the universe bends toward justice. But the battle isn't over yet. Morrison has one final card to play, and he's desperate enough to burn everything down rather than face what's coming. The fire starts in Morrison's office, accelerant-fed flames that race through files and evidence with the hungry efficiency of desperation. Smoke billows into the corridor where Michael leans heavily on Helen, his legs weak from months of confinement, while James supports his other side. Behind them, Sullivan herds the other prisoners from their cells. 23 men who were disappeared for knowing too much, seeing too much, refusing to stay silent about the machinery of corruption that feeds on war. He's destroying the records, Torres shouts over the wail of fire alarms. Everything that proves these men were here. He's burning it all. But Morrison made one critical miscalculation. He assumed Patricia Morse only brought one camera. She's already uploaded 300 photographs to a network of editors and congressional staffers. Images of prisoners, medical records photographed through office windows. Morrison's own face twisted with rage as he confessed to containment. The evidence exists in a dozen locations now, multiplying faster than any fire can erase it. "Everyone out," Sullivan orders, but Michael pulls against Helen's grip, his eyes fixed on the smoke pouring from Morrison's office. "The files," he rasps, his voice damaged from months of scarce use. "Helen, there are files, evidence I compiled before they took me. Morrison kept them as insurance against his superiors. If they burn, you almost died for that evidence once," Helen says fiercely. "I won't let you die for it again." But those men who helped him, the network, without proof, they'll just bury this deeper, find new ways to profit. James makes a decision. "Where in the office?" Michael's eyes widen. "James, no. Where?" "Safe behind the desk. Combination is 83721. Michael grabs James's jacket. "But the fire will have to wait its turn." James is already moving, pulling his jacket over his head, breathing shallow against the smoke that's filling the corridor like poison fog. Lucy's voice cuts through the chaos. She's awake in Sullivan's arms, her face pale with fear. "Daddy, don't." But James Callahan has spent 3 years in careful mourning, playing it safe, protecting what's left of his family by never risking anything. And in this moment, surrounded by men who lost everything for telling the truth, he remembers what his late wife Caroline used to say. "Money means nothing if you're too afraid to spend it on things that matter." He plunges into Morrison's office. The heat is immediate and vicious, flames consuming curtains and carpets, smoke thick enough to turn visibility to arm's length. James drops to his hands and knees where the air is slightly clearer, crawls toward where the desk should be. Morrison appears from behind the desk like a demon conjured from smoke, his jacket smoldering, his face blackened with soot, a pistol shaking in his hand. "You don't understand what you've destroyed," he screams over the roar of flames. "The money I diverted funded operations that kept soldiers alive. The supplies I sold bought intelligence that saved American lives. I'm not the villain here." "You locked innocent men in cages," James says, his voice steady despite the gun pointed at his chest. "You told families their soldiers were dead. You profited from war while better men bled. Don't you dare claim righteousness now." Morrison's finger tightens on the trigger. The shot never comes. Deacon tackles him from the side. 2 old soldiers crashing through Morrison's desk, the gun skittering across burning floor. They grapple in the flames, and for a moment, James sees the terrible arithmetic of violence, the cost of stopping evil with force. Then Torres is there, dragging Morrison out while Deacon locates the safe, spins the combination Michael provided, yanks open the steel door to reveal files, ledgers, recorded conversations on reel-to-reel tapes. Everything Morrison kept as leverage, now turned into evidence of his own crimes. James grabs what he can carry, and they run. They burst from the building into cold mountain air that tastes like salvation, coughing and stumbling while behind them, the facility burns with the brightness of secrets finally exposed to light. Fire trucks arrive, then military police, then federal marshals, Sullivan called through back channels. The prisoners huddle together on the lawn, wrapped in blankets, blinking at freedom like men emerging from caves. And Helen holds Michael while he shakes with exhaustion and relief, whispering promises into his hair, promises about home and healing and never being apart again. Lucy runs to James, who's collapsed on the grass with soot-stained lungs, and Patricia Morse's camera documenting the moment when truth finally overwhelmed power. "You saved them, Daddy," Lucy says, and her voice carries the simple certainty of childhood faith. "You saved all of them." But James knows better. He looks at Helen, still wearing her yellow dress, still keeping faith when everyone else called her delusional. She saved them. By refusing to accept comfortable lies. By standing on her porch every evening for 317 days, listening for footsteps that the world insisted would never come. By choosing hope over surrender. Morrison is arrested before dawn, along with 6 other officers whose names appear in the files James rescued. The Washington Post runs Patricia Morse's story on the front page. Ghost prison exposed. Army whistleblowers held in secret facility. By noon, 3 senators have called for investigations. By evening, the Secretary of Defense has resigned. The men from the facility are processed, debriefed, offered medical care and psychiatric evaluation. Some have families to return to. Others have been gone so long, their families have moved on, remarried, rebuilt lives that no longer have room for ghosts returning from the dead. But Michael Cartwright has a wife who never stopped waiting, and as Sullivan drives them back to Georgia, Michael finally free, Helen finally vindicated, James and Lucy witnessing a love that refused to die. The sun rises over the mountains they're leaving behind. There will be trials, testimony, congressional hearings that drag on for months. Morrison and his accomplices will face military courts and federal charges. The facility will be investigated, shut down, its existence acknowledged in official reports that will be declassified decades later for historians to study. But all of that is tomorrow's battle. Tonight, they're going home. To a small house on Magnolia Street where a porch light has burned for 17 months, where devotion proved stronger than corruption, where a blind woman's faith moved mountains that law and power and military authority couldn't shake, and where sometimes, just sometimes, waiting is the bravest thing you can do. Magnolia Street looks exactly the same as the day Michael left. Oak trees heavy with Spanish moss, painted porches glowing in the afternoon light, the Kowalski boy's bicycle leaning against his fence. But everything is different now. The convoy pulls up to Helen's house just as twilight settles over Valdosta, that golden hour when the world holds its breath between day and night. Neighbors emerge from doorways, drawn by some instinct that tells them something momentous is happening. Mrs. Patterson from across the street, the Hendersons with their twin boys, old Mr. Chen, who runs the corner store, and never quite believed the Army's story about Michael's death. They gather on lawns and sidewalks, watching as James helps Helen from the truck, as Sullivan and Torres support Michael, still weak, still adjusting to freedom after 17 months in a cell, up the walkway to his own front door. The porch light is on. It's been on every night since he left, burning through bulbs and storms and seasons, a beacon of faith that never wavered. Michael stops at the bottom step, his hand gripping the railing, his eyes filling with tears as he looks at the house he thought he'd never see again. The mailbox he painted blue because Helen said it reminded her of summer sky. The rose bush they planted on their first anniversary. The swing where they'd sat on warm evenings, planning a future that seemed so certain before the war. She waited, he says, his voice breaking. All this time, she actually waited. Helen's hand finds his face, her fingers tracing the tears on his cheeks. I told you I would. Did you think I was lying? I thought... He can't finish. 17 months of thinking she'd moved on, forgotten, accepted his death and built a new life. 17 months of imagining her with someone else while he rotted in Morrison's prison. I thought I'd lost you. Never. Helen's voice is fierce, absolute. Not for one single day did I stop being your wife. Lucy appears at James's side, still clutching her rabbit, her eyes solemn as she watches the reunion. Miss Helen never gave up, she tells Michael. Even when everybody said she should. Even when they called her crazy. She knew you were coming home. Michael kneels slowly, his legs protesting the movement, and meets Lucy's eyes. You must be the little girl who told her the truth. The one who started all this. Lucy nods. I'm Lucy. I'm 7. And this is my daddy, James. He's the one who found you. Then I owe both of you my life. Michael extends his hand, and Lucy shakes it with the gravity of someone who understands the weight of what's transpired. Thank you for being brave enough to speak the truth when no one else would. James steps forward, and for a moment the two men simply look at each other. The millionaire who risked everything to help a stranger, and the soldier who survived hell on nothing but hope. Your wife is remarkable, James says quietly. I know. Michael glances at Helen, who's standing perfectly still on her porch, tears streaming down her face, her yellow dress stirring in the evening breeze. I've known since the day I met her. I just forgot that remarkable people don't give up just because the world tells them to. He climbs the steps, each one an effort, Helen meeting him at the top. They stand in the doorway of their home, framed by light, and the neighbors watching from the street feel like witnesses to something sacred. The kind of love that doesn't exist in movies or romance novels, but in the daily choice to believe when belief seems impossible. Inside, the house is exactly as Michael remembers. Helen has kept it frozen in time, his jacket still hanging on the hook by the door, his slippers beside the couch, his coffee mug in the cupboard waiting for the morning he would return. She's dusted around his things, preserved the life they had like a museum exhibit of faith. You kept everything, Michael whispers, touching the photo on the mantel, their wedding day, both of them so young and certain. I kept you, Helen corrects, in every way I could. That night, James and Lucy stay in the Callahan mansion next door, giving Michael and Helen the privacy they've earned. But Lucy can't sleep, her mind too full of the story she's been part of. So James sits on the edge of her bed and tries to explain what they've witnessed. Daddy, will they be okay? Lucy asks, her rabbit tucked under her chin. After everything that happened. I think so, little bird. They have each other, and sometimes that's enough. Are you going to miss Miss Helen? Now that she has Michael back? The question surprises. James exposes something he hasn't quite admitted to himself, that in the months of helping Helen, of fighting alongside her, of witnessing her extraordinary strength, he's felt more alive than he has since Caroline died. Not romance exactly, but kinship. The recognition of someone who understands loss and chooses hope anyway. I'll miss our conspiracy, he says carefully. But I'm glad she has what she was waiting for. Lucy studies his face with the unnerving perception of children. Mommy would be proud of you for helping them, for being brave. James pulls his daughter close, breathing in her strawberry shampoo, grateful for this small person who's witnessed both grief and triumph and somehow maintained her faith in goodness. I think she would be proud of both of us. Across the property line, in the small house with the blue mailbox and the porch light that can finally be turned off, Helen and Michael sit at their kitchen table, hands clasped, talking through the night about everything that happened and everything that comes next. Michael will need medical care, his body weakened by captivity, his mind scarred by isolation. There will be appointments with doctors, sessions with counselors who specialize in trauma, slow rebuilding of strength and normalcy. Helen will need to adjust to having him home, to sharing space she's learned to navigate alone, to the reality of love after absence. But they'll face it together. "I documented everything," Michael says at one point, his voice still rough. "Every transaction Morrison made, every officer involved, every supply manifest that didn't match the actual deliveries. I knew if I could get it to the right people, it would bring down the whole network." And it did. Patricia Morse's story is everywhere. Captain Sullivan said there will be trials, investigations that could take years. "Will you have to testify?" Michael asks, worried. Helen smiles. "I've been testifying for 17 months. Standing on that porch every evening was its own kind of testimony. To faith, to love, to refusing to accept lies just because they're convenient." She squeezes his hand. "But yes, I'll testify in court too. I'll tell them everything." Outside, Valdosta sleeps under a canopy of stars that watched over both of them during their separation. Helen standing beneath them each evening, Michael glimpsing them through barred windows and remembering freedom. The trials will come. Morrison and 11 other officers will face courts-martial, some receiving prison sentences, others dishonorably discharged, their pensions stripped, their reputations destroyed. The ghost prison will be shut down permanently, its existence acknowledged in congressional testimony that will be quoted in history books decades later. Patricia Morse will win a Pulitzer Prize for her reporting. Captain Sullivan will be promoted and tasked with reforming military oversight procedures. The 23 men freed from the facility will slowly reintegrate into a society that changed while they were locked away. And James Callahan will establish a foundation, the Caroline Callahan Memorial Fund, dedicated to helping families of soldiers navigate military bureaucracy, providing legal support and investigative resources to those seeking answers about missing loved ones. But all of that is future history. Tonight is just a soldier and his wife, reunited against impossible odds, sitting in their kitchen while the porch light finally goes dark after 317 nights of burning. "I'm sorry," Michael says at some point, his voice thick with guilt, "for putting you through this, for making you wait, for..." Helen presses her fingers to his lips, silencing him. "Don't you dare apologize for being a good man. Don't you dare regret doing the right thing. I waited because you were worth waiting for, because our love was worth fighting for, and I'd do it all again in a heartbeat." He kisses her then, and it tastes like salt and tears and coming home. In the morning, Lucy will knock on their door with fresh biscuits from the Callahan kitchen, James trailing behind with an invitation to Sunday dinner. The Pattersons will bring a casserole. Mr. Chen will stop by with flowers from his garden. The neighborhood will fold Michael back into its fabric with the gentle persistence of community that knows how to welcome soldiers home. But for now, in this quiet hour before dawn, when the world belongs only to those awake to witness it, Helen and Michael Cartwright simply hold each other. Two people who chose hope over despair, faith over resignation, love over the terrible arithmetic of war. And outside on Magnolia Street, where porch lights flicker on one by one as morning approaches, their story becomes legend. The blind woman who waited and the soldier who came home. A reminder that sometimes the most radical act of resistance is simply refusing to stop believing. That devotion can be its own form of sight. That love, when it's real and fierce and uncompromising, can move mountains. Even the ones built by powerful men who thought they were untouchable. 5 years pass like water over river stones, smoothing rough edges, carving new channels, leaving marks that tell stories to anyone patient enough to read them. The Morrison trial becomes the largest military corruption case in U.S. history, exposing a network that stretches across 3 continents and implicates 47 officers, 12 government contractors, and 1 senator who resigns in disgrace before indictment. Colonel Richard Morrison receives a 25-year sentence in Leavenworth. He serves 11 before dying of a heart attack, still insisting he was a patriot who made difficult choices in impossible circumstances. No one attends his funeral except his son, the lieutenant who lied to Helen, who serves 3 years for obstruction of justice and lives the rest of his life under a different name in a different state. But that's the ending for villains. The story worth telling is what happens to the people who chose differently. Michael Cartwright recovers slowly, his body healing faster than his mind. For months after returning home, he wakes screaming from nightmares of concrete walls closing in, of footsteps in corridors that mean interrogation or punishment or another day bleeding into another day of isolation. Helen learns to recognize the signs, the way his breathing changes, the tension in his shoulders. And she's always there when he surfaces, her hands finding his face in darkness, her voice steady as she reminds him where he is, who he is, that he's safe. They don't talk about having children. The doctors say Michael's malnutrition during captivity may have affected his fertility. And besides, they're both older now. He's 34, she's 32. But then, on a spring morning in 1968, Helen wakes up nauseous and certain, and 9 months later, they welcome a daughter they name Faith. She has Michael's dark hair and Helen's stubborn determination, and she grows up knowing her parents' story. Not the sanitized version, but the truth about what evil looks like when it wears uniforms and hides behind authority, and what goodness looks like when it refuses to surrender to convenient lies. James Callahan never remarries, though several women in Valdosta make their interest known. He throws himself into his foundation work, traveling to Washington quarterly to testify before committees, funding investigations into dozens of missing soldiers, helping reunite 17 families with loved ones who'd been written off as casualties. Lucy grows into a fierce young woman who studies journalism at Georgetown, following in Patricia Morse's footsteps. She writes her college entrance essay about the summer she was 7 and learned that telling the truth could change the world. She keeps her mother's photograph on her dorm room desk, next to one of Helen and Michael at Faith's christening, a reminder that love takes many forms, romantic and parental, and the kind that exists between people who fight together for something larger than themselves. On Sunday evenings, the Cartwrights and the Callahans still have dinner together, alternating between houses. Michael has learned to cook, Helen has learned to let him help without micromanaging, and Faith toddles between the adults, collecting attention like flowers. These meals are loud and warm and filled with the easy intimacy of people who've seen each other at their worst and chosen to stay anyway. One evening, when Faith is 3 and Lucy is preparing to graduate high school, the conversation turns to the porch light, that symbol of Helen's vigil that burned for 317 nights. "Do you ever think about those evenings?" James asks Helen. Standing out there alone, waiting? Helen, who can navigate her kitchen blindfolded now, who raises her daughter with the same fierce competence she brought to fighting military corruption, considers the question while Faith climbs into her lap. "I think about them every day," she says quietly. Not with regret, but with gratitude. Because those evenings taught me something important. That faith isn't about certainty. It's about choosing to believe when you have every reason not to. It's about lighting a candle in the dark even when you can't see what it illuminates. Michael reaches across the table, finds her hand, squeezes it. They don't need words anymore for this. The acknowledgement of what they survived together. The recognition that their love is built on the foundation of the worst thing that ever happened to them. I still keep a light on, Helen admits. Not on the porch anymore, but in the hallway. Just a small one. So if Michael wakes up from nightmares, he can see his way back to me. And I always find my way back, Michael adds, his voice rough with emotion even after all these years. Lucy wipes her eyes, pretending it's allergies. James stares at his plate, his throat tight with the kind of love that has no name. Not romantic, not familial, but something equally profound. The love of witnessing other people's courage and being changed by it. That night, after the Callahans have gone home and Faith is asleep in her crib, Michael and Helen sit on their porch swing, the same one where they used to plan their future before the war. The neighborhood is quiet, porch lights glowing up and down Magnolia Street like earthbound stars. Do you ever regret it? Helen asks, speaking up about Morrison, everything that followed? Michael is quiet for a long moment, rocking the swing with his foot, listening to the cicadas sing their mechanical prayers. I regret the time we lost. I regret that you had to fight alone for so long. I regret that 23 other men had to suffer because I didn't move fast enough to expose the corruption before Morrison caught me. He pauses. But do I regret trying to do the right thing? No, never. Because if I'd stayed silent, I wouldn't be the man you waited for. I'd be someone else, someone I couldn't respect. Helen leans her head against his shoulder, and they sit in comfortable silence while the night deepens around them. The blue mailbox still stands at the end of their walkway. The rose bush has grown wild and beautiful. The third step still creaks, because some things don't need fixing. They're perfect in their imperfection. Reminders of all the ordinary moments that make up a life. In 1976, Michael testifies before Congress one final time, helping to pass legislation that requires independent oversight of military prisons and establishes protocols for families seeking information about missing soldiers. The bill is called the Cartwright Act, though Michael insists Helen's name should be on it too. She's the one who never stopped fighting, he tells the senators. I just did my job. She did the impossible. Helen, sitting in the gallery with Faith on her lap and James beside her, doesn't argue. She's learned that sometimes you have to let people honor you, even when you don't feel you deserve it. The story spreads over the years, told and retold, until it takes on the patina of legend. Journalists write books. A television movie is made in 1982, though Helen refuses to watch it, saying the actress they cast doesn't get her voice right. Students write research papers. Veterans groups give speeches about the woman who wouldn't accept that her husband was dead and the man who risked everything to prove her right. But the truth is simpler and more profound than any legend. It's about a woman who chose to wait, a man who chose to hope, a millionaire who chose to help, a child who chose to speak truth, and a faith that refused to die even when the whole world insisted it should. They say on Magnolia Street, even now, decades after the Cartwrights have both passed and the house has changed hands 3 times, that sometimes on certain evenings when the air is thick with Georgia heat and possibility, you can see a light burning on that porch, a golden glow that shouldn't exist but does. A reminder that some devotions transcend time and death and the terrible machinery of human cruelty. The neighbors who've moved in over the years report hearing footsteps on the walkway at dusk, the jingle of keys that sound like brass against steel. And if you stand very still and listen with more than your ears, you might catch the whisper of a promise kept, a vigil honored, a love that proved stronger than every force arrayed against it. But that's just a story people tell. The truth is what matters. And the truth is this: Helen Cartwright waited 317 days for a husband the world called dead, and she was right to wait. And her faith moved mountains, and love, real, fierce, uncompromising love, can accomplish the impossible. If you're brave enough to keep the light burning, even when the dark seems endless, even when everyone says you're foolish, even when hope is all you have left. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to remember that faith and devotion still matter in this world. And tell us in the comments, what would you have done in Helen's place? Would you have kept waiting, or would you have accepted the comfortable lie? Your answer might surprise you,